Okay, so I'm so excited by Joss today. Joss is an assistant psychologist working in the UK's NHS system, an independent recovery coach, an ambassador for the UK's leading eating disorder charity Beat, and a podcast host of Honey, Are You Happy? So thank you so much for joining me today, Joss. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me too. It's lovely to be
Yeah,
here.
we're going to jump right into it. So I know we've talked previously, and I just, I want you to just share your story of kind of where you were through eating disorder recovery, and like where did you start and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, sure thing. So most people's kind of journeys, I think when they have to talk about them, it feels a bit messy looking back, and can be quite tough to pinpoint things. But I'll start the story from when I was about 15, although I think I probably had like emotional eating difficulties before in childhood. I would comfort eat a lot, and I was always known as like the foodie one and the one at parties who would be found around the food table.
Mhm.
At 15, I kind of was starting in the UK what's known as our GCSEs. They're like kind of exams you take when you're 15, and they unlock the kind of subjects you can do in college, which then kind of unlocks what you can do at university. So at 15 in the UK, you're having to make some quite big decisions and having to really think about, your grades and the subjects you're taking. And I think my 15-year-old self just wasn't prepared. And it all felt a little bit too much, too overwhelming. And I think at that age as well, being female, everyone's kind of going through puberty. My body was changing. I was feeling a bit inferior compared to some of my very smart friends, my very smart brother. And I think just a lot of these feelings of inadequacy were bubbling below.
Mhm.
I was becoming more aware of my body shape and my weights. I was always the curvier one. I was a very foodie girl, am now again.
Mhm.
And I think, I'd had a few episodes of bullying from just boys at school or like teasing. I wouldn't call it bullying per se. And my brothers as well, making kind of brotherly sibling jokes about food and body image. And these things kind of built up. And then in the winter of 2008, my mum said to me after Christmas that maybe we should both go on a diet. And that was the kind of trigger point for me, utilizing kind of food and weight manipulation as a way to cope with difficult feelings. Um, at first, it started as a very kind of just harmless diet. And, I was just kind of being more mindful with my mum about what we were eating, portion sizes, which for me were probably my biggest downfall. And over time, things just for me became a way to control where my mum could just kind of, stop and start and didn't really bother her much. For me, it became a real focus of obsession and a way to kind of really numb out and control these really overwhelming feelings I had about myself, about the direction of my life, and my self-esteem, which was quite low at that time. Um, so this kind of progressed over summer until my brother brought out with my mom that Joss has lost a lot of weight. We should probably be, asking if she's okay. My parents batted it away. No, she's fine. She's just a teenager. She's going for a fad. It's okay.
Mhm.
Sadly, it continued to just go down and down and down my weight. And by the kind of beginning of the new academic year, which is September here in the UK, a family friend came to my mum and said, "You really need to take Joss to the doctors. She's looking very sick."
Mhm.
Um, I was dragged kicking and screaming to my GP and given the diagnosis of anorexia. I think as well, if we look back at 2008, there was no social media. There was like MySpace was a big thing. I think I was using something called Bebo. We were still kind of talking on MSN Messenger. There wasn't really, iPhones weren't a thing. I had a Nokia. There was no Instagram. So my knowledge of eating disorders and mental health in general was really small. We didn't really cover it at school either. So this kind of word, this label that the doctor gave me, I really didn't understand. I knew that how I was feeling towards food wasn't normal anymore. I could tell that I was more anxious, I was fearful, I was controlling, I wasn't letting anyone cook for me at home, and I was kind of choosing to stay in to control my food rather than go out and see friends and go and party, which most teenagers are doing. Um, and at this point as well, exercise was kind of creeping in as well, and I got obsessed with kind of step counts and walking everywhere and things like this and home workout videos. So I was aware on some level that my behavior was changing, but the way my eating disorder worked was it very much made me feel like I was in the right and everyone else was in the wrong. So any help people tried to give me, I was kind of just so sure that they were just trying to get me to be fat, and they were so against me. They were jealous of me and what I was doing, which now with hindsight I can see was just my eating disorder and the control it had over me. So I ended up going into about 2 or 3 inpatient stays in my kind of recovery journey, mainly because of the way that the UK system works, which is it's a bit of a postcode lottery of treatment. So some areas will have really good eating disorder units and treatment services, and sadly other places is quite sparse and there's not much on offer. For me, it meant I had to go out of area for quite a few treatments and also be put on quite lengthy wait lists. And with eating disorders, that kind of time spent waiting is time when you can deteriorate really, really quickly. So it just meant that relapses happened quite a lot. For me, I also had to drop out of my A-level studies and redo them from a hospital. And I also had to drop out of my first degree, as a nurse was what I first tried to be. And again, it was just I wasn't at a robust stage in my recovery. I wasn't resilient enough. I didn't have those tools to keep myself healthy. And so I ended up relapsing quite a few times. The changing point for my recovery journey was kind of being put into an adult ward. Again, the adolescent kind of children's wards for eating disorders are really, they're obviously not nice places to be, but they're very positive. There's lots of things and resources to help you look outwards. There's loads of activities going on. You're often meeting people who are in their teenage years who do have dreams and ambitions and want to get better. In the adult wards, you're meeting people who have been chronically ill for years, who might be 30, 40, 50 years old. And they're institutionalized, this is their way of life. And it was a bleak experience for me. I was also NG tube fed in this ward and put on a high dose of antipsychotics, which to this day I question actually the medical choice around that in my treatment plan. So it wasn't a very nice admission for me. And it was the point in which I thought, you know what, anything's got to be better than this. And in the kind of lengthy days I had of just sitting around waiting for appointments, I started making myself a really big vision book, like a vision scrapbook. And this helped me kind of really pinpoint my goals and what I wanted from life. I self-discharged from that placement when I could. And my mum even says to me that I came home with just a different attitude to recovery. I wasn't physically well yet, but my attitude towards weight gain, towards trying new foods, expanding my coping skills, really was just skyrocketed. And I was just put into a new path in my recovery. And from there on out, really, the rest kind of writes itself. I went back to uni and in England. I studied 4 years of psychology. I also did my master's. I've traveled and worked abroad. I worked in the USA on cruise ships. I've kind of tried to really make my life very rich. And with that, started working alongside our leading eating disorder charity Beat as a media representative and an ambassador. So with them, I do lots of different educational events, mentor people, and then picked up some private clients as well. So yeah, that's kind of my story and how I got to where I am today.
Wow, there's so much in there. I mean, there's so many points I just want to like pull out because I think the first thing is like when you talked about in 2008, there weren't many resources to really understand what was going on. And I felt like that myself too, because right around the same time, I was also going through my eating disorder. And I said, I wish that all these things that exist now were around back then, because you just felt like you were on an island, you know, when you're going through recovery. So I think that's so important that you talk about that, like just the awareness. And I think just that's why having candid stories like this and sharing your story, you know, when someone listens to this, they'll be like, oh my gosh, like that resonates with me. Like that is what I went through. And it just makes people realize they're not alone in this. There's so many people that go through this and experience these thoughts. And it's amazing to see the journey of like, you recognize how it was the eating disorder really speaking back then. But when you're going through it, you and the eating disorder are completely meshed. You can't differentiate that.
Absolutely.
So it's, yeah, I love how you pinpointed that, because again, things have evolved. So we need to like take hold of these resources that are available right now. When you were going through that, what would you say was, I know you said, do you say like the turning point was kind of when you went into that adult ward? Was that kind of when you really had like the wake up, I don't want to live like this anymore?
Yeah, I think definitely for me it was that admission. I think it just highlighted so much of what I was missing out on. I think as well, for me, dropping out of my degree, that was another big turning point, because ever since I was probably the age of like 5 or 6, I thought I wanted to be a pediatric nurse.
Mhm.
And so when I got onto the course up in Leeds, I was so excited. I was like, this is what I've been wanting my whole life. To get there and start a course and then realize, oh, actually, this is not what I want to do. And I was realized that shift patterns wouldn't be something that really would suit me. And then, of course, at the time, my eating disorder was the only thing I had to kind of cope with that feeling of like not fitting in, not liking my course, being away from home. I relapsed pretty quickly. And I think, again, dropping out, there was this massive feeling of relief, but there was also this massive feeling of fear. And it was like, now it's just me and my eating disorder. Like, what else do I have that I'm good at?
Mhm.
And I think then through my recovery, I became really interested in the way our brains work.
Mhm.
And I think when you realize that your whole personality change is when you're mentally ill, I was like, wow, like, how did I lose 6 years of being Joss? And like what was going on at quite a neurological level that meant that my brain could turn against me so badly. It was completely against everything we're told about how our bodies are designed to keep us alive, because my
Yeah.
body was quite literally telling me the one thing that would keep me alive was bad for me, and that I shouldn't eat anymore. And I was so sure that that was factual and that was true, and it was quite a terrifying thing to think, oh my gosh, we can be our biggest cheerleaders, but we can also be our worst enemies. And um yeah, and I think that was my door, that was the door kind of that led me into psychology and into like interested in our brain and our behavior and our health and all the things, like you said, the social media and our environment and experiences that kind of contributes to our overall health status.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. And on top of the resources you had that were like the medical professional resources, did you have any other resources that helped you get out of that, like a social circle or any or family or any other resources that you felt like you relied on at that time?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I think like the medical side of things was really good at just looking at refeeding.
Mhm.
It's the medical model of health, isn't it? There's a problem, like what is the route to kind of alleviate the symptoms? So the symptom of anorexia is the big, like the weight loss. And so
Yeah.
medical model was really good at refeeding me.
Mhm.
But it was the things like the friendships that were always there for me, the friends that like modeled really healthy behaviors. My family have a really I've got quite a close family, and they have all got healthy attitudes towards food and body image and exercise. So that created a naturally very healing environment for me to be in. They were
Mhm.
also very supportive, and they were willing to read and learn about eating disorders, and also just listen to me non-judgmentally. So that really helped. And I think at the time as well, this is when I found the charity Beat in the UK. And at the time, they had just an online discussion forum, which you could go on like once a week, and you could chat to either someone from like a helpline or another person, like a group of people who were going through recovery. And I had to be in the right headspace to do it, obviously, because sometimes you just don't want to talk to people going through similar things. But that
Yeah.
group, I found a lot of kind of like advice and help for how people were coping. And there was always someone there who would talk through a difficult day with me. So I used their hotlines and I used their online resources quite a lot. And that
Yeah.
was one of the reasons that I really felt like I wanted to work alongside the charity at a later date and kind of give back to them and really promote the amazing work that they now do in this country. So yeah, and I think again, the last thing that really helped was having that internal motivation, which wasn't always there, but really came from doing the creative work of the vision boards and the scrapbooking and kind of thinking, who could Joss be without an eating disorder? Because, like you said, the two become very enmeshed. And at
Yeah.
times, I really couldn't work out what was me and what was my eating disorder, especially when it came to things like exercise, because I've always loved moving and I've always loved movement and dance and badminton and things. So I think creating these kind of vision books of what I wanted my life to look like, to feel like, really helped me have something tangible to work towards that I could almost measure my own recovery against. So when that anxiety level around food was dropping, I could then see my life kind of open out, and all these kind of other opportunities that I then had headspace to take up could come about.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a big message that from what you just said, it's about who are you going to become? Who do you need to become to live that joyful, fulfilled life? Versus I think sometimes we get kind of stuck in what do I need to do? And when we get stuck in what do we need to do, it's like if we don't become that person in our mind, then we get stuck in those things, and then it just kind of dies off for us. So it's like really having that long term, like we're in a marathon, where do we need to do? What do we need to do to get to that point of who we become? So it's
Definitely.
such an important part there. Excuse me.
Yeah.
One thing I want to kind of go back to, because I know you talked about your body image when you're growing up, or maybe things she said. How much do you think contributed to your mindset around the eating disorder?
So I think it was things, it contributed to the development of it. I think it definitely contributed to the maintenance of it, and the fear that if I recovered, I would go back to what I was. And
Mhm.
I think that was a big thing of not noticing that actually we are always evolving and changing. And
Mhm.
because of this very experience and the self-awareness I'm getting about my relationship with self through recovery, I will never be my 15-year-old self or my 12-year-old self. I will always have that insight into how I'm coping and into my relationship with food and self.
Mhm.
Um, I think it definitely kind of, I use those experiences that happened, maybe the teasing comments from my siblings, to keep myself ill, to be like, but that's going to happen again. And, or even to blame someone.
Mhm.
There's a lot of anger when you're sick. There's a lot of like, looking for someone to blame what's happened to you and externalizing the problem. And I think at times it was kind of a way to point the finger and be like, if you hadn't made that comment, maybe I would have had a better relationship with my body. Um, but I think as well, even though there wasn't things like social media, there were still trashy magazines that I would, as a teenager, sometimes buy. And I think even the comparisons to social media, like, or not social media stars, but TV stars and film stars and celebrities in general, even those kind of magazines were so hypercritical towards female bodies.
Mhm.
It would always be like, look at Cameron Diaz on the beach and then circling her cellulite, and all these
Mhm.
things that kind of from a young age were telling me female bodies are wrong,
Yeah.
or I need to be doing something to shrink or to look a certain way. And so it's kind of these things that we're conditioned and socialized in. So I think all of those that kind of accumulated to the fear of getting better, because it was like I found a behavior or a way of coping that kind of keeps me safe and keeps me within a norm that society might even think is acceptable or admirable.
Mhm.
Especially during a kind of quasi recovered stage of my journey, when I was able to function, but I was still kind of masking my illness with over exercise.
Mhm.
I got really into bodybuilding, and I found actually I got a lot of praise for this, and a lot of people saying, oh, you should compete, or how do you keep your physique so lean? And these comments that people don't realize that my eating disorder hyper focused on, and thought, oh gosh, like what you're doing is correct, stay
Mhm.
as you are, even if you're still preoccupied with food or
Yeah.
still anxious around sitting down all day or whatever it is.
Mhm.
It was kind of, I was just very hyper focused on those comments. So I think to break away from that, again, it was using those kind of cognitive behavioral therapy techniques of rationalizing, of putting
Mhm.
thoughts on trial, of not taking everybody's comments as fact, and actually not being afraid to be assertive or critique them. and noticing how things like fat phobia show up in those comments. If people are saying it's admirable to be so lean and burnt out, what does that say about their own attitude towards healthy body weights and shape? Are they correct? Do they actually need challenging or educating? And kind of just expanding my mindset around concepts like that, I think has like led me to having the healthy attitude that I have now around body image and food and exercise.
Yes, I mean, literally what you just said, so much there. I mean, and that's the thing, not that these people say these comments in a malicious way, but people don't realize that all these subconscious messaging that you get from that. And that was something I experienced too with over exercising. I was so much praise around, oh, you're doing so great. How are you so dedicated? How do you have that much drive? And they don't realize what's going on internally in your head, that the drive is truly this eating disorder that is eating at you, but externally, you put on a happy face and everything looks great from someone who doesn't know what's going on internally. And so like, I think a lot of times too, that contradictory, like what's going on inside versus what people see outside, can be really damaging too when you're going through that.
Yeah. And I think we see it a lot in men as well. And I think men are particularly great at masking. And, I think for women, like we can mask quite a bit, but there'll always be a friend that we kind of end up going to, or a mum or someone that we're like, oh, do you know what, actually? And we kind of blurt it all out. Or we're good at like seeing our friends and noticing when things are maybe a little bit off and calling them out and being like, do you fancy talking? Because I feel like you're a bit overwhelmed at the moment. Men, I feel like there's a more of a stigma of like, I don't talk, I don't ever let that barrier down, I'm always tough and no one knows what's going on underneath. And I think for them, like eating disorders can be really pervasive and quite chronic because they just never break down that shell of talking about what they're experiencing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately it is like, there's so much concentration around women in this, but there are a lot of men that go through these same exact things. And just like you said, it's almost more socially acceptable for women to go through it than men. So it really keeps them almost in a closet with it, which is such a shame, because in order to heal, you have to bring awareness to the situation. And if you keep everything inside of you, it's only just going to eat at you.
Definitely.
Which just perpetuates the problem. If you, from where you are today, what would you say your mindset is now versus kind of what your mindset when you were in the thick of it?
Yeah, hugely different. Just like to a completely different person. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons I find it so easy to talk about my experience is it feels like talking about another person. I think there is less fear. I'm more chilled. There's less anxiety, there's more freedom in my thinking, more spontaneity, and more enjoyment. Like food has become something that I enjoy. Again, I enjoy the social aspect of it, I enjoy the family aspect of it, the cooking, the whole, like all of it. And I'm able to be present with food instead of hyper focusing on a meal or a snack and overthinking it. And if I have a day, like I know it's coming up to Christmas and you guys have just had Thanksgiving, so two quite foodie holidays, I know then when I was really sick, I could just not justify the food at all. But now I can rationalize it. I can look at the enjoyment of it. I can think like it's a few days. It's really not that big a deal. And the kind of good of those days and the connection with people outweighs the kind of fear of any weight gain, because I now just the weight gain is like the least exciting or important thing that could happen to me. But again, I think that's just after having now a decade of seeing my weight stay quite stable. And there have definitely been times when I've been abroad and I've gained weight, and definitely been times when I've been super stressed or gone through a breakup or lost a loved one and it's maybe dipped a bit, but it's never triggered an eating disorder. It's always just kind of stabilized and be normal. So I think that helps as well, because you've got that past experience to back you up and say, well, nothing went wrong last year. Last year I was able to enjoy all the food and join all the parties, and it's okay. So it's going to be okay this year. And I think when we can argue back with those thoughts that we get, because everyone gets like difficult thoughts at times, that's just human existence. But it's being able to argue back with them, and then, you know, with that, choose the behavior that kind of promotes recovery. So I think I'm much better now at identifying a thought as soon as it comes in, rationalizing it if it's slightly anxious, and then just doing the kind of feeling the fear and doing it anyway, or, you know, questioning it, which I definitely wouldn't have done when I was sick. I definitely would have just, that eating disorder voice was on loudspeaker, and I was just completely following anything it would say. But now it's just, it's not there. I consider it not there. So yeah, I think the mindset is definitely what I would say is more healthy.
Yeah. Sorry, my internet is choppy right now, but yes, and I love that you highlighted that it's not that you don't get rid of these thoughts forever after you go through an eating disorder. It's that you can check them better, and I think that's such an important thing to highlight, because it's realistic that when you go through something so complex in your life that it may never truly be gone, but you have so many tools that it doesn't impact you anymore.
Definitely. And I think for me as well, and I don't think I've really talked about this much before, but one of the big things for me in the previous really like year or two has been the exercise thing, because I'm known amongst my friends as being someone who loves to work out and is quite routined with it. So I'll go in the morning before work, and that's just something I will do, and it's not something I have to really think about. I just wake up, grab my stuff and go. And for a while I questioned, like, is this still linked with my eating disorder? And then earlier this year I got diagnosed with ADHD, which completely made sense to me. And actually that's helped me have a bigger understanding of maybe my tendency to engage in risky behaviors, like eating disorders, or even things like skydiving and bungee jumping, and that kind of more adrenaline junkie kind of activity, which I love and I gravitate towards, but also my need to kind of burn off some energy first thing in the morning to be able to focus. So I think, again, just kind of understanding how my mind works has really helped me understand my behaviors and what I do to keep myself well, and to question whether something is coming from a really healthy place or a place which is actually driven by something a bit disordered. And that's been really helpful to kind of keeping myself stable.
Yeah. And really what I get from that is too, is the more you understand yourself, the better you can help yourself. And
Absolutely.
I think sometimes when you're going through an eating disorder, you almost numb what your real feelings are. You just numb it with exercise, you numb it with either restrictive eating or binge eating, whatever it may be. But I think really to come to a full place of recovery, you have to really understand yourself as well as you possibly can, because then you know how you can help yourself.
Definitely.
Which is such a profound thing. If you could say something to your younger self, what would you tell your younger self? So if you know, with your mindset now and everything you've gone through, what would you say to maybe your 12 or 13-year-old self? What would you say to them if you had that conversation?
I think I would tell them that their worth is not attached to their weight. And really kind of, I think that would probably be what I needed to hear, because I think I was quite caught up in my physical appearance being attached to my worth. And also maybe just tell her that everything's going to be okay, like everything's going to work out. The weird thing is, like, I don't think I would take away the years I was sick, because I think I've learned so much about myself, and it's made me a better psychologist today. It's made me a really empathetic healthcare worker, and really, really good at advocating for my patients. And, you know, sometimes I'm in big conversations with like doctors and psychiatrists who have a lot of textbook knowledge. Don't get me wrong, they're very smart people, but they don't have the lived experience. And I can advocate for them in a way that I feel maybe they don't understand. So I wouldn't take back my experience for the world. So I might just tell that 12-year-old that, you know what, it's going to be rough, but you're going to be such a beautiful person afterwards. Like, it's going to be such a good experience for you. You will make it through. And just to keep going. But definitely, if there's something I could tell just any young girl or any young guy, it's just that their appearance and their weight does not equate to anything to do with their worth. Because I think that's really all we're seeing now with social media as well, is these kind of big glamorous pictures and people attaching them to other meanings of, wealth, success, relational happiness, financial security, all these kind of hidden messages that we attach to a physique, which really makes them a bigger image, like a bigger problem, sorry, than what they need to be.
Yes.
So I think that's the message I would give that girl, is that, you are worthy, you're so lovable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love how you said that you wouldn't not go through that, and how much you can appreciate the hard times, because they truly do define your character, and they truly do become your biggest strengths. Like every struggle that you go through, it really is a blessing when you're on the other side of it and you recognize how much it gives you. And the insight, especially with an eating disorder, unless you've lived and breathed the mindset of that and the thoughts and everything that goes into that, it really is hard to understand. So having that compassion and that understanding for people who have gone through it, it's just tremendous. And what a gift to anyone going through that now, that you can use those moments that were your darkest moments as their light now. And I think that's just a beautiful thing.
Definitely. Actually, can I share a story with you about that? Because I
Yeah. Oh
had
yeah, I'd
like a
love to.
really lovely thing happen
Yeah.
the other day. I was I was on one of the free coaching calls I do. It's like an initial assessment. And I was talking to this lovely client. And at the end of the session, I always end with like, deflecting the topic onto something really positive, so they leave in a really good mood. And we are just talking about what they were going to do for the rest of the evening. And this client said to me, "Oh, I've listened to your podcast so many times, and I'm making the same vision scrapbook that you made yourself in hospital." And she picked up and showed me this beautiful book that she had made with all these lovely paintings and stuff in them. And for me, it was a real moment of like something that I did a decade ago when I was just stuck in a hospital, really lonely and really struggling to push myself through, is now actually something that someone else is using as a tool to get them through, to push them through for another day. And I just thought, that's worth it. Like that is a blessing in itself. If I can just, you help one person, you help the world. So I just think like that was a real special moment, and just like a story of how actually everything we go through can be used. And there's always a lesson, a strategy, a tool, something that we can pick out and give to someone else. And I think that's a real blessing of actually recovering from something like an eating disorder.
Yeah, oh, definitely. What a profound moment too. That must have been so touching to see, like, it must have really put everything in perspective of where you were and how far you've come. And now to be able to give someone that tool and that gift of helping themselves through that dark place. What an amazing thing to be able to give someone. That's just saying. I know it really is so eye-opening when you go through something as difficult as that, to see how far you've come in it. And I know you talked about how it's almost like a different person than who you are now. And it's just amazing. And like for anyone who's in a really tough place, I think just take that message that no matter how hard or hopeless you think it is right now, you can always change. You always have that ability to change how you think, to rewire your brain, and to become the person that you dream of becoming. So never ever give up hope on that. That's always something that you can do. And again, just you're a testament to using your biggest struggles as your biggest strengths. And that's just an amazing thing.
Definitely. And I think along that lines, it's also being aware of the language you use around ourselves. So many times I talk to people who are like, "Oh, but I've been struggling for X amount of years, therefore I'm chronic, or I'm treatment resistant," and it's like, well, the language you're using around yourself is so negative. Like, how are you ever going to move forward if you're literally, all these weeds are growing around you? It's like you're trying to break through, but the language you're using is basically keeping you tied down to a label. The other one that I always question is when people say like, "Oh, I am anorexic." It's like, no, you have anorexia. You're not anorexic. You have anorexia, you have bulimia. These are just things that, they come in as illnesses, but you can get rid of them. It's not something that, an identity that you have to possess. But I know for some people, they do become a real identity, and they become a real sense of self when maybe they don't really know who they are without their eating disorder. And I think that in itself can be a really exciting journey for you. Might feel a bit scary, but
Yeah.
actually being like, who do I want to be without an eating disorder? And kind of breaking away from that label can make you feel really empowered and really quite proud of who you can be without this kind of coping mechanism or illness.
Yeah. And it's so important because it may seem small, like those little nuances, like I have anorexia versus I am anorexic. Like when you're going through it, you're like, what's the difference? It seems so small, but it is, completely true that the languaging you give your brain is so important. And it's literally, are you, your identity, because look how, you had that vision of who you want to become and it pulls you out of that. So once you have that identity of who you are, everything you do and think moves in that direction. So it is so important. I like how you pointed that out, just those little languaging pieces that, again, may not seem huge, but they really are huge for your brain and
Definitely.
how you think.
Yeah.
And another thing off of that is, are you a product of your creation or are you a product of circumstances? And this is a big thing to really question yourself, because again, people have awful situations. They have really terrible things that happen to them, and not taking away from that. But again, if you have that mindset of like, I'm just a victim of these circumstances, you essentially hand your power over to people and the circumstances, and then you kind of stay stagnant. Versus
Yeah,
if you're a
100%.
product of creation, you recognize this is a really bad situation, but I'm my own creator. I choose what I get to think. I choose what I get to do. I choose who I become. And if that's the mindset you can pull out and create in your life, it's really going to have a better trajectory and bring you to your hopes and dreams of where you want to see your life go.
Absolutely. I actually call that the victim versus survivor mentality. And it was one of the other kind of light bulb moments in my recovery, actually. I remember being on the phone to my brother when I was at a hospital admission, and my anorexia was kind of brought about by basically a realization that I'd gone through quite a lengthy period of abuse in my childhood, sexual abuse. And that came to light during a therapy session where I got a flashback. It was a really weird situation. And I kind of slipped into that victim mentality of like, well, this happened to me and now I'm the way I am and now I can't get out of it. And I remember my brother saying to me on the phone, he's like, Joss, you have a choice. Like, you can choose to be a victim and you can go in and out of hospitals and treatments, or you can choose to be a survivor. And it kind of made me realize that actually, yeah, like I do have a choice. Like, bad things happen to people all the time. And yes, rightfully so, it should make me angry and sad and maybe depressed. And maybe it makes me anxious around certain situations. And that's kind of expected. But I can still choose to move forward. I can still choose to do the behaviors that will get me out of this. And actually, I began to twist the situation around to see that actually staying ill was letting that perpetrator win, because he was getting what he wanted. He was making me as small as he could make me. And I actually saw it actually as a strength to be like, do you know what? It's better if I recover, if I'm a survivor, and then I use my voice and I use my story to call things like that out and to help other people who might go through similar situations.
Yeah.
And so I think that what you've said is so true, that kind of whole bad things happen, but we do have power, we do have control over them or what we do next.
Yeah. And it may be hard to see when you're in the thick of that, because
Absolutely.
there are some really, really awful situations, but again, at the end of the day, when you can see that light and that you do have that choice, it makes a huge difference. And just going off of what you said, now you can use that to help other people. And then what an amazing gift that has now become to you, that strength to pull yourself out of a really tough situation.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about how you help people as a clinical or assistant psychologist, and then through your podcast, and any other ways that people can connect with you and get help from you.
Yeah, for sure. So I offer a kind of a free coaching call, which is like 45 minutes of just kind of getting to know each other and hearing about whatever you're going through, whether it's body image difficulties or eating disorder difficulties. And then I kind of do a recovery coaching course, which is 10 sessions, 1-to-1. I also offer a body image coaching course, which is just for body image. So we don't really touch much on the eating side of things. I also do intuitive eating courses as well. And there's a booklet which goes alongside that, which you get as part of the package price. For men, I've also just written an improving body image book as well, and that will be up and available for the new year. Otherwise, it's just the podcast, Instagram. I'm at Honey, Are You Happy? And I also have a blog, which is honeyareYouhappy.co.uk. And yeah, so that's kind of the main things that I do. So people can find me on the links, which I believe will be in the show notes. So
I will. Yeah, I'll post those for anyone who wants to connect to Joss. I will definitely include all those links and how you can join her programs or just connect with her. So with you. Just one other thing. So if someone was in a really, really tough place right now and they're just like, okay, I don't know what to do, where would you suggest somebody start? So they have not received any help, they don't really have a lot of support. Where should they start right now if they're listening to this and they're just in a really, really tough place?
So I would always start by going to your doctor or going to your GP. I know that depending on where you're based and depending on your GP, some people have a great understanding of eating disorders, some people are quite dismissive and don't really get them. I'm presuming you have access to the Beat website in America, but if you do, I can even give you the link to the resource. Actually, it might be quite useful. There's a downloadable GP letter which you can print, and it has pre-written out questions, and it means that if you're struggling to talk to someone like a healthcare professional about what you're going through, you can just answer the questions and hand them the piece of paper, and it just makes that conversation a little bit more easier. And it can also help the GP take you a bit more seriously. So I would always say just reaching out to a GP, a friend that you trust, anyone, it can just be one other person that you can confide in and feel safe around. Just kind of like talking about what you're going through and the difficulties. Because there might be something very practical that they can do for you. It might be that you just need more support with your meals. It might be that, if you're an athlete and you've got a coach at university or at college, then you can just go to that coach and say, actually, I'm really struggling with XYZ. And they can give you some more support around your exercise and your eating and things like that. The other thing that I'm a big advocate for is therapy. Again, I'm not 100% sure in the US what the kind of system is for therapy. I know in the UK, there's a self-referral on the NHS website, so you can refer yourself for CBT. But I'm always a big advocate for a counsellor, a therapist, a health coach, someone with that specialist knowledge, maybe lived experience to help you, because eating disorders are very manipulative and they will convince you that what you're doing is right, even if what you're doing is still very disordered. So I always think having some professional therapy or some psychological input is really, really important. But if you're just struggling today, I would just say reach out to one other person. Just find one other safe other that you can talk to get that ball rolling. You're always welcome to DM me as well on Instagram, because I'm always happy to help or signpost people to other resources. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Very helpful. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you so much for your insight, Joss, and your story and sharing your story. And it really is so powerful to have these stories out there, because again, I think when we were going through there, I never once heard anyone talk about their story through an eating disorder. And I know if I had heard that at the time, it would have made me feel like I'm not alone in this. And it's just the courage to share your story and what you've gone through is just tremendous, and will help people realize that there is a way out of this, and there is a way to joyfully enjoy your life and not be tethered down by an eating disorder. So thank you. Thank you for
welcome.
Everything.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. And again, for anyone who wants to connect to Joss, I will include all her links in the show notes. And if you haven't done already, please subscribe to the channel. And please write any questions or comments, and we will answer anything that you want to know, or again, give you any kind of support that we can here. So thank you again, Joss, and we will connect soon.
Definitely. Thank you.